A massive great white shark struck with unrelenting force, locking its jaws around his leg. Blood clouded the water as a second shark lunged, tearing through flesh and bone. The diver struggled, but there was no escape. Within seconds, a third shark joined, pulling him in opposite directions, his body disappearing into a frenzy of teeth and thrashing. His dive team could only watch in horror before fleeing to the surface. These are the most terrifying shark attacks ever caught on real life. On September 3, 2015, a group of divers set out from Gansbaai, South Africa, known for its dense population of great white sharks, and the day had started like any other at sea. The weather and water conditions were clear, and the team was excited for another deep dive into shark territory. Among them was 38-year-old Tom Mitchell, an experienced diver with years of open water exploration. He had traveled the world studying marine life, but South Africa's waters had always been his favorite. This time he was joining a team that included his longtime dive partner, Eric Dawson, along with 3 other divers: Mark Lewis, a marine photographer, Victor Rains, a professional guide, and Anna Carter, an adventure enthusiast who had spent months training for this dive. The group planned to explore a site roughly 6 miles off the coast known as Shark Alley. The region was famous for its high population of great white sharks drawn in by large seal colonies. Researchers often studied their behavior in these waters, and it had become a hot spot for both thrill seekers and conservationists. The team was well prepared, using a certified cage diving vessel operated by Captain Henry Collins, an experienced boat operator who had spent most of his life on these waters. The plan was simple: descend to about 60 feet, observe the sharks from a safe distance, document their behavior, and return to the boat in an organized ascent. By midday, the group suited up and began their descent. The water was cold but clear enough to see at least 30 feet ahead. The first few minutes were peaceful. A few smaller fish darted through the reefs below, and the divers kept close together, their flashlights illuminating the deep blue around them. Tom felt at ease, scanning the ocean floor for any movement. 15 minutes in, the first great white appeared. It was massive, easily 15 feet long, gliding through the water just beyond their reach. The group watched in admiration as it moved effortlessly through the currents. A second one appeared not long after, circling in the opposite direction. Tom signaled to Eric, who acknowledged the presence of the sharks but remained calm. Encounters like this weren't unusual. Great whites were naturally curious but rarely aggressive without provocation. Then a third shark appeared. It was even larger, possibly 18 feet long, and its massive body cut through the water as it circled slowly. Unlike the others, this one seemed more deliberate in its approach and calculated in its movements. The divers remained still, following proper protocol. No sudden movements, no erratic gestures. The sharks simply observed them briefly, as if assessing their presence. But something changed. The largest shark moved in closer, and the others followed its lead. The usual curiosity turned into something else, something more aggressive. Tom's breathing grew heavier, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. Sharks rarely attacked without reason, but he knew that changes in behavior could signal danger. The first strike was sudden. The largest shark lunged forward, clamping onto Tom's right leg with terrifying force. The impact was brutal, sending a shockwave of pain through his body. Blood filled the water instantly, spreading like a cloud around them. Eric, just a few feet away, watched in horror as Tom thrashed, struggling to break free. The second shark struck next. As Tom fought to push the first shark away, another came from the side, biting down on his left arm and tearing through his wetsuit. His regulator muffled his screams, but the agony was clear. Eric and Victor tried to intervene, striking at the sharks with their dive knives, but the predators were relentless. The final blow came when the third shark lunged from below, biting into Tom's torso. Within seconds, Tom was being pulled in 3 different directions. The sharks tore into him with horrifying precision, their teeth shredding through flesh and bone. His body twisted unnaturally as they ripped him apart, the water turning into a frenzy of movement. His dive mask slipped off, his oxygen tank dislodging as his body was torn between the 3 massive predators. Eric, frozen in shock, could do nothing but watch. He had seen sharks attack before, but never like this. It wasn't a single bite, a moment of curiosity gone wrong, a full-blown feeding frenzy. The other divers, paralyzed by fear, could only back away, their instincts screaming at them to escape. Victor signaled for an emergency ascent, knowing there was nothing more they could do. They could still see the chaos below as they rose toward the surface. The sharks continued their attack, thrashing violently as they consumed what remained of Tom. By the time the diver broke the surface, gasping for air, there was nothing left of him, only blood spreading in every direction. Captain Henry had already noticed the disturbance from the boat. When he saw the divers break the surface, he knew something had gone wrong. He and his crew hauled them aboard, their faces pale, their bodies trembling. Eric collapsed onto the deck, ripping off his gear, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The crew scrambled to scan the water, hoping to see Tom. But there was nothing. Body, equipment, and nothing to recover. The incident sent shockwaves through the diving community. Experts later speculated that the shark's behavior had been triggered by baiting activity in the area. Tour operators often lure sharks closer to boats using chum, and the lingering scent of blood may have triggered an aggressive response. Others believe the sharks were already in a heightened state of predation when the divers entered the water. Whatever the cause, Tom Mitchell's death stood as one of the most horrifying shark attacks ever recorded. His name was etched into the memories of those who had witnessed it. His final moments a brutal reminder of the ocean's unforgiving nature. The morning of March 18, 2013, started like any other for Dave Williams and his 17-year-old son, Alex Williams. The two had traveled to Gans Bay, South Africa, known as one of the best places in the world for shark diving. It was a trip they had planned for months, one final adventure together before Alex left for university. Dave, a seasoned diver with over 20 years of experience, had introduced his son to the sport when he was a child. Alex had only recently earned his diving certification and was eager to prove himself in open waters. The boat, the Ocean Spirit, left the harbor early in the morning, carrying a small group of divers, including Dave, Alex, their guide, Martin Harris, and 3 other experienced divers. The weather was clear and the waters were calm, perfect conditions for the dive. The location they were heading to, known as Shark Alley, was famous for its dense population of great white sharks, which often lurked near the area's seal colonies. Many divers came here to see the legendary predators up close, either in cages or through free dives. Dave had done both and was comfortable in the water. Alex, though confident, had never encountered a shark in the wild before. As the boat reached the dive site, Martin gave the briefing. He reminded everyone to stay close to their dive buddy, remain calm if they encountered a shark, and avoid making sudden movements. The goal was to explore the reef below while watching for the majestic creatures that patrolled the deep. Dave and Alex double-checked their gear, exchanged a silent nod, and followed the group into the water. The descent was smooth, the water crystal clear. Schools of fish darted past them, weaving through the coral-covered rocks below. Alex stayed close to his father, his breathing controlled, his excitement barely contained. For the first 15 minutes, everything was peaceful. They moved through the reef, watching small marine creatures move in and out of hiding spots. Then Dave noticed a shift in the water. The smaller fish had vanished, a sign that something larger was nearby. Turning slightly, Dave saw a massive great white shark, at least 16 feet long, moving silently beyond the visibility line. It was watching them. Dave knew enough about sharks to understand their behavior. The shark wasn't attacking, it was investigating. He signaled to Alex, telling him to stay still and remain calm. Alex saw the shark now too, his body tensing. It was his first close encounter with such a powerful predator. For a moment, nothing happened. The shark circled at a distance, uninterested in the divers. The group remained still, watching carefully, but then something changed. The shark's posture shifted. It moved more urgently, its eyes locked onto the two of them. Dave tightened his grip on his spear gun just in case. Alex, still motionless, breathed steadily, waiting for his father's cue. Without warning, the great white turned sharply and charged. It moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance between them in seconds. Dave pushed Alex back instinctively, but the shark was already upon them. Its massive jaws opened wide, clamping onto Alex's leg. The force sent a cloud of blood into the water. Alex let out a muffled scream through his regulator as the shark shook him violently. Dave reacted instantly. His training kicked in, and without hesitation he aimed his spear gun and fired directly at the shark's side. The spear struck, but it barely made an impact. The shark was relentless, dragging Alex downward, his body jerking as he struggled to break free. Desperate, Dave abandoned his gear and lunged toward the predator, punching at its snout, trying to force it to let go. Alex's blood mixed into the water, attracting more movement in the distance. Martin, still nearby, saw the chaos unfold and rushed toward them, signaling the other divers to ascend. He reached Dave just as the shark released Alex for a brief second. Dave grabbed his son, trying to pull him upward, but the shark wasn't finished. It lunged again, this time straight at Dave. Its massive jaws clamped onto his chest, tearing through his wetsuit. The force knocked the air from his lungs, and within moments, blood poured from his body. Martin had no choice. He tried to pull Alex away, but the younger diver was already going into shock. The shark dragged Dave down deeper, thrashing its powerful body as it ripped through him. His last conscious moments were spent reaching toward his son, trying to save him, but it was too late. Alex, still bleeding heavily, struggled in Martin's grip, his body weak. The second shark appeared then, drawn by the scent of blood. It struck Alex next, its razor-sharp teeth cutting into his side. Martin screamed through his regulator, hitting the shark with a dive knife, but it didn't matter. Within seconds, Alex was gone too, disappearing into the dark water as the sharks ripped into him. Martin, his heart pounding, kicked upward as fast as he could, breaking the surface and gasping for air. The other divers were already on the boat, waving frantically. The crew pulled him aboard, and his hands shook uncontrollably as he ripped off his mask. Below, the water churned with movement, the last traces of red fading into the depths. The boat captain immediately called for emergency response, but they could do nothing. The ocean had taken them. News of the attack spread quickly, shaking the diving community to its core. Dave Williams was a respected diver. His experience was unmatched, and his love for the ocean was evident in everything he did. His son Alex was full of promise and eager to follow in his father's footsteps. They had entered the water together, a father guiding his son, but neither had made it back. The incident left many questioning the risks of diving in known shark territories. Some believed that baiting in the area had altered shark behavior, making them more aggressive toward humans. Others argued that the great whites had been hunting, acting on instinct. But it wasn't just an attack for those who had been there that day. It was a fight, a father's desperate attempt to save his son, to do whatever it took to bring him home. He had died trying, refusing to leave his boy alone in the darkness. The ocean had given Dave and Alex their greatest adventures, and in the end, it had taken them both. The morning of August 7th, 2023, was supposed to be another perfect fishing day for Ben Crawford and his longtime friend Tom Reeves. The two had been deep-sea fishing together for years, often venturing miles off the coast of Florida in search of big catches. That day, they had taken Ben's boat, the Marlin King, out to a well-known fishing spot about 15 miles from Key West. The area was famous for its deep waters, where anglers frequently caught tuna, marlin, and snapper. It was also a place where sharks were known to roam, especially tiger sharks, who often scouted fishing boats drawn by the scent of bait and fish remaining in the water. Ben and Tom set out early, loading their cooler with drinks and fishing gear, hoping for a good catch. By noon, they had already reeled in several large fish, their excitement growing with each successful catch. The sun was high in the sky and the ocean stretched endlessly around them, its surface shimmering in the heat. The two friends cast their lines, laughed, and exchanged stories as they worked. By mid-afternoon, their cooler was nearly full, and Ben decided to start gutting and cleaning some of their fish while Tom continued fishing. As Ben worked, he tossed the fish guts and remains overboard, unaware that the scent of blood was traveling fast through the water. Beneath the surface, a predator was already closing in. Focusing on his fishing rod, Tom suddenly noticed something unusual in the water. A large shadow moved beneath the boat, slow and deliberate. At first, he thought it might be a large fish, but as it came closer, he saw the unmistakable shape of a tiger shark. It was massive, at least 12 feet long, its dark stripes faintly visible beneath the surface. It moved with unsettling calmness, circling the boat as if assessing the situation. Still unaware of the shark, Ben stood near the boat's edge, wiping his hands on his shorts. He leaned over slightly to see if fish were gathering beneath the ship. He dipped his hand somewhat into the water for a second without realizing it. That was all it took. In a sudden violent burst, the tiger shark surged upward. Its massive jaws snapped shut around Ben's right arm, the force nearly pulling him off balance. A scream of pain tore through the air as the shark thrashed, dragging Ben toward the edge. Tom turned just in time to see the horrifying sight. His best friend locked in the jaws of one of the ocean's most dangerous predators. Tom lunged forward, grabbing Ben by his free arm, trying to pull him back. Blood sprayed across the deck as the shark bit down harder, its serrated teeth slicing through muscle and bone. Ben's face twisted in agony, his body jerking violently as the shark pulled him downward. Tom planted his feet and pulled with everything he had, his heart pounding in terror. For a brief moment, the shark let go, its powerful body twisting as it adjusted its grip. Ben collapsed onto the deck, clutching the remains of his arm, now a mangled mess of torn flesh and exposed bone. Blood poured from the wound, staining the deck and dripping into the water, further fueling the predator's aggression. Tom scrambled to grab anything that could stop the bleeding. His hands were shaking as he pressed a towel against the wound, but the bleeding was too severe. Ben's eyes were wide with shock, his breathing rapid and uneven. Then, before either of them could react, the shark struck again. It launched partially out of the water, its jaws locked onto Ben's leg. With terrifying strength, it yanked him over the side of the boat and into the water. The last thing Tom saw was his best friend's horrified expression before he disappeared beneath the waves. Tom screamed, grabbing a gaff hook, desperately stabbing at the water, but it was useless. The water churned violently, turning red as the shark thrashed with its prey. Tom could only watch in helpless terror for what felt like an eternity. Then the thrashing stopped. The ocean grew still except for the ripples left behind. There was no sign of Ben, no movement, no struggle. Only blood spread across the surface, a stark reminder of what had just happened. Tom collapsed onto the deck, his body shaking uncontrollably. His mind refused to process what he had just witnessed. One moment Ben was laughing, cleaning fish, and enjoying the day. The next he had been ripped from the boat, taken by the very ocean they had both loved. With trembling hands, Tom reached for the boat's radio, his voice barely stable as he called for help. The Coast Guard responded immediately, instructing him to stay where he was. Tom sat there, staring at the blood-stained water, unable to do anything but wait. When the Coast Guard arrived, they searched for Ben's body, but there was nothing left to recover. The tiger shark had taken everything. The attack sent shockwaves through the local fishing community. Many fishermen knew the risks of attracting sharks, but no one had expected something so brutal. Experts later speculated that the scent of the fish had drawn in the shark remains, mistaking Ben's hand for an easy meal. Once the initial bite happened, the predator had entered full attack mode, its instincts overriding any chance of survival for Ben. Tom never went fishing again. The boat was sold, and the waters off the Florida coast, once a place of adventure, had become a reminder of the nightmare that had taken his best friend. On June 14, 2012, Michael Donovan set out on what was supposed to be a relaxing yacht trip through the Caribbean. A seasoned traveler and avid sailor, the 45-year-old American businessman had taken time off from his hectic life in New York to enjoy the open sea. He had rented a luxury yacht, the Sea Breeze, in Nassau, Bahamas, and planned a week-long journey through the tropical waters, stopping at small islands. The trip had been peaceful, the days filled with clear skies, gentle waves, and the quiet solitude he had longed for. That morning he had navigated toward a remote stretch of open water, planning to sail toward Grand Turk by sunset. The ocean was calm, and the air was humid. Michael enjoyed his breakfast on the deck, soaking in the view. He checked the forecast before leaving, ensuring the weather would remain stable. By early afternoon, he was miles from any land, fully embracing the isolation that made sailing so thrilling for him. Without warning, the wind shifted. The once blue sky darkened and heavy clouds formed on the horizon. Michael knew the weather in this region could change suddenly, but he had not expected the storm to move in so fast. The waves grew violent within an hour, tossing the yacht like a toy. The wind howled and rain slammed against the deck. Michael tried to maintain control, gripping the wheel with all his strength as the yacht tilted and groaned under the storm's pressure. A sudden deafening crack echoed as a massive wave crashed into the vessel's side. Water flooded the deck, and before he could react, another wave struck. The yacht lurched violently, and Michael lost his footing, slamming hard against the railing. The storm's force overwhelmed the boat, and the hull split in seconds. Michael scrambled for the emergency raft as the yacht sank beneath the relentless waves. By the time the storm passed, the sea had swallowed the sea breeze whole, leaving nothing but debris floating on the surface. Michael clung to the small inflatable life raft, his breath ragged, his body aching from the impact. His hands trembled as he scanned the endless horizon. There was no land in sight, only the vast, unforgiving ocean. He was alone. The sun beat down mercilessly as the hours dragged on. Michael rationed the small supply of water and food he had managed to grab before abandoning ship. His body ached from exhaustion, but the worst part was the silence, the endless waiting. He knew his best chance of survival was to remain in the raft and hope for rescue. But as the sun dipped, another fear set in, the darkness. As night fell, the water around him grew eerily still. The sounds of the ocean changed, the gentle waves replaced by something more ominous. A faint splash echoed from somewhere nearby, then another. Michael's pulse quickened as he scanned the water, his eyes barely adjusting to the moon's dim light. Then he saw it. A smooth and deliberate shadow glided beneath the raft. Its shape was unmistakable. A shark. Its presence sent a shiver down Michael's spine. Michael had read about oceanic white-tip sharks, their tendency to stalk shipwreck survivors, and their relentless curiosity, which often turned into aggression. He stayed as still as possible, barely daring to breathe. Minutes passed, then an hour. The shark circled, sometimes vanishing into the darkness before reappearing closer. Michael clutched the small emergency knife in his hand, knowing it was a useless defense against a predator built for hunting. Then the attack came. The shark rammed the raft's side without warning, nearly flipping it over. Michael grabbed the ropes, trying to steady himself, but another jolt sent him crashing into the water. Panic surged through his body as he kicked desperately, trying to climb back onto the raft. Then searing pain. A crushing force clamped around his leg, dragging him downward. The water erupted in a flurry of bubbles as Michael thrashed, his screams lost beneath the surface. The shark's teeth tore through flesh, the pressure unbearable. Desperate, he stabbed at the shark with his knife, but the blade barely pierced its thick hide. The predator shook its massive head, ripping deeper into his leg before letting go. Michael fought his way back to the surface, gasping for air. Blood clouded the water around him, and he knew the shark wasn't finished. His vision blurred, his strength fading fast. He clawed his way back onto the raft, his hands slick with his blood. The pain in his leg was unbearable. His body was shaking uncontrollably. The shark circled again. Michael's breaths came in ragged gasps. He knew he wouldn't last much longer. The loss of blood was making him weak. His mind screamed for survival, but his body was failing him. He gripped the edges of the raft, his fingers tightening as the predator returned. Another strike. This time the shark lunged straight onto the raft, its powerful jaws locking onto Michael's side. A violent thrash spun the raft, and Michael was yanked into the water again. His world turned into chaos, pain, water, darkness, then nothing. The ocean fell silent once more. The next morning, a passing cargo ship spotted the drifting raft. The crew rushed to investigate, lowering a lifeboat into the water. When they pulled the raft closer, they found what was left. Torn fabric, scattered supplies, and blood-stained water. Michael Donovan was gone. His disappearance sent shockwaves through the sailing community, a grim reminder of the unforgiving ocean and the predators that lurked within it. The oceanic white-tip shark, known for its ruthless attacks on shipwreck survivors, had claimed yet another victim. The morning of July 18, 2024, started as any other for Bethany Beth Caldwell, a 31-year-old swimmer who had spent years training in open water. Living near Cape Cod, Massachusetts, she was no stranger to the ocean's beauty and dangers. She had grown up swimming competitively and later transitioned into endurance training, often pushing herself farther into the Atlantic than most would dare. The waters off Cape Cod were known for their great white shark population, especially in the summer when seals were plentiful. But Beth never let that stop her. That morning she arrived at Nauset Beach before sunrise, the sand still cool beneath her feet. It was a routine she had followed for years. The early morning calm, with few people around, made it the perfect time to swim. The ocean, though unpredictable, felt like home to her. She stretched briefly before adjusting her swim cap and goggles. Her friend and occasional training partner, Daniel Hayes, was supposed to join her, but he had messaged earlier that he wasn't feeling well. That left Beth alone, but she was used to solitude in the water. She waded in, feeling the familiar chill of the Atlantic rush over her skin. The water was calm, with only gentle waves lapping at the shore. She began her swim, and her strokes were smooth and rhythmic. Her breathing was controlled, and her focus was on distance rather than speed. She aimed to push herself farther than usual, beyond the shallows where most casual swimmers stayed. She had done similar swims before, but the air felt different today. Cape Cod has long been a hotspot for great white sharks, drawn by the large seal population. Researchers have documented increased shark activity over the years, and swimmers are always advised to stay close to shore. Signs warning of sharks are posted along the beaches, but Beth has never encountered one in all her years of swimming. She has read stories and seen footage of sharks patrolling the waters, but they have remained distant. She paused as she reached nearly a mile offshore, treading water to check her surroundings. The coastline was still visible, but the beachgoers were distant figures, unaware of how far she had gone. She took a deep breath and turned to continue, but something caught her eye. Below her, a shadow moved. It was slow, deliberate. At first she thought it was a large fish, but then she saw the unmistakable outline of a dorsal fin. Her heart pounded as she realized what it was. A great white shark, easily over 10 feet long. It had appeared silently, its movement calculated, gliding just beneath her. Her instincts told her to remain still, not to thrash or panic. She floated, her mind racing, trying to recall everything she had ever learned about shark behavior. The shark circled once, then moved away, disappearing into the depths. Beth exhaled, relief washing over her. Maybe it had been curious and decided she wasn't food. For a moment she thought she was safe. She turned toward shore, swimming steadily and controlling her movements. Every few strokes, she glanced over her shoulder, scanning the water. The shadow was gone, and she forced herself to stay calm. She was still nearly a mile from shore, and panic would drain her energy faster. Then a sudden surge in the water behind her sent a shockwave of fear through her body. The shark had returned. It was closer, moving faster this time. Before she could react, a force slammed into her side, knocking the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded through her right leg as teeth clamped down just above her knee. She barely registered the shock before the shark thrashed, pulling her under. Her vision blurred as salt water filled her nose and mouth. Instinct took over, and she kicked with her free leg, desperate to break free. The shark released her suddenly, startled by her resistance or momentarily distracted. She surged to the surface, gasping for air, her heart pounding wildly. Blood clouded the water around her, a deep red spreading through the blue. The pain in her leg was unbearable, but she forced herself to move. The shoreline looked impossibly far, but she had no choice but to swim. She knew she was bleeding heavily, and the fear of attracting more sharks only added to her desperation. She pushed forward, using mostly her arms, her injured leg barely able to function. Every stroke felt slower, her strength draining with each passing second. She tried to focus on reaching the shore, but exhaustion pressed down on her. Then another movement below. The shark wasn't finished. It circled again, drawn back by the scent of blood in the water. She felt the current shift as it moved closer. Her body screamed to go faster, but she could barely keep herself afloat. A sharp pull on her left leg sent her underwater again. The shark had latched on, its jaws crushing down with brutal force. A violent shake sent fresh agony through her body. Darkness crept into the edges of her vision. She tried to fight, to resist, but her body was giving out. She surfaced one last time, gasping, her arms flailing weakly. The beach was still so far away. The people there had no idea what was happening, how close she was to being lost. She tried to call for help, but no sound came. The world tilted as her strength failed. Her body sank, the water closing over her. The ocean had claimed her. The shark, satisfied or simply following instinct, let go, leaving only silence in its wake. The waves carried her motionless body toward shore. But by the time she was found, nothing was left to save. Beth had always believed she understood the ocean, but on that day, it had reminded her of something brutal. Once it decides to take you, there is no escape. The morning sun had risen high over the waters off the coast of Gansbaai, South Africa. It was December 12, 2020, a warm summer day in the southern hemisphere, and the ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. The region was well known for its dense population of great white sharks, attracting thrill-seekers and marine researchers alike. The waves moved gently beneath the luxury yacht owned by Peter Hallstrom, a 34-year-old entrepreneur who had spent the last several years chasing adrenaline-fueled experiences. Peter had invited 3 of his closest friends, Daniel Foster, Marcus Klein, and Jason Reynolds, to join him for a week-long cruise. The trip had been planned as an escape from the pressures of their busy lives. They had spent the past few days deep-sea fishing, drinking expensive champagne, and swimming in the open waters. The yacht, staffed with a full crew, offered everything they needed. A private chef prepared meals, drinks flowed freely, and every moment was spent indulging in the finest luxuries. After a late breakfast on the deck that morning, Peter stood near the railing, gazing at the horizon. The yacht's captain, Richard Voss, had mentioned earlier that sharks were common in the area, often drawn to fishing boats discarding scraps. The idea excited Peter, who had always been fascinated by sharks. He had seen them on nature documentaries and even considered going cage diving. But today, he wanted to see one up close without a cage separating them. A few crew members had just finished cleaning the fish caught the day before, leaving behind a bucket filled with scraps. Peter walked over and lifted it, curiosity filling his mind. He carried the bucket to the edge of the yacht and tipped a handful of fish guts into the water. His friends, initially distracted by their drinks, turned to watch. The scent of blood spread quickly through the water, drifting beneath the surface. Minutes passed in silence. Then, a shadow moved below the yacht. A bronze whaler shark appeared first, gliding through the water. It circled once before disappearing. Then a much larger presence stirred below. A great white shark, unmistakable in size and movement, had arrived. Peter's excitement grew as he reached for more scraps, tossing them overboard. The shark swam closer, its massive body moving effortlessly through the water. The others watched as the predator glided beneath the surface, its dorsal fin cutting through the waves. Encouraged by the response, Peter wanted to bring it even closer. He grabbed a large chunk of meat from the bucket, holding it over the water. The shark turned, its dark eyes locked onto the bait. Peter leaned forward, stretching his arm out to get a better look. The shark swam toward the meat, its movement smooth and deliberate. But as it lunged, it did not go for the bait. It instantly changed direction, its jaws snapping shut on Peter's arm. A sharp, searing pain shot through his body as he screamed. The shark's teeth sliced deep into his flesh, the pressure crushing the bones in his forearm. Blood poured into the water, spreading in a cloud around the thrashing animal. The impact sent Peter forward, nearly pulling him overboard. His friends reacted instantly, grabbing his body and pulling him back onto the deck. Having felt resistance, the shark released him almost immediately and disappeared beneath the surface. Peter collapsed onto the deck, gripping his arm. Blood soaked his shirt, pooling beneath him as the crew scrambled into action. The yacht's medic rushed forward, pressing a towel against the wound to slow the bleeding. Peter's face had turned pale, his body trembling from shock. His friends stood over him, frozen, unable to process what had happened. The yacht's captain contacted the nearest coastal authorities for emergency medical assistance. The yacht began moving toward shore at full speed, cutting through the waves as fast as the engines could. Crew members secured Peter's arm, wrapping it tightly to control the bleeding. Every second felt longer than the last. By the time they reached the harbor, an ambulance was already waiting. Paramedics lifted Peter onto a stretcher, rushing him toward the hospital. His pulse was weak, his breathing uneven. His friends followed closely behind, their once carefree vacation now overshadowed by the horrifying encounter. Doctors worked quickly to assess the damage. The shark's bite had caused severe lacerations, tearing through muscle and nerve tissue. Though the bones had not been completely shattered, reconstructive surgery would be necessary. Peter was stabilized and prepped for emergency treatment. Hours later, he awoke to find his arm heavily bandaged. the pain radiating through his body. The news of the attack spread quickly. Reports surfaced online about a luxury yacht excursion gone wrong, with photos of the blood-stained deck circulating on social media. Marine experts weighed in, explaining that sharks were naturally drawn to the scent of food in the water. Some speculated that the sudden movement of Peter's arm had triggered the shark's instinctive response. In the days that followed, Peter reflected on the incident. He had spent years chasing adrenaline, pushing limits without considering the risks. Now, with his arm permanently scarred, he understood the consequences of his actions. His fascination with sharks remained, but it had been replaced by something else: respect. The yacht remained docked for the rest of the trip. The crew, shaken by the attack, refused to allow any more reckless behavior. Peter's friends, once eager for excitement, found themselves unwilling to return to the water. The moment had changed them all. A few days later, Peter walked out of the hospital, his arm still wrapped in thick bandages, a dull ache serving as a constant reminder of what he had been through. The deep scars would remain etched into his skin, a permanent mark of that fateful encounter, a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. He had set out with a dream, eager to see a great white shark up close, and he had gotten his wish in the most harrowing way imaginable. The experience had changed him, leaving behind more than just wounds. He would never forget the moment he locked eyes with the predator, the raw power, the sheer force of nature. It was a memory that would live with him forever, a tale of fascination and survival.